Hey, everybody. Good evening. I'm Blake Bradford, the District Superintendent for Northwest District, and welcome to the My Job Workshop for Staff Parish or Pastor Parish Relations Committees. It's great to have you all on this Zoom this evening. And again, we are recording this for folks that I've already gotten several texts and emails. Hey, could you record this? Or, hey, I'm going to be able to watch it, but all my committee can't be there, and I'd like to have a copy. So we're recording it for them. Again, please feel free to put any questions in the chat, or you can wait till we have some question times that are going to be scattered throughout tonight's presentation. So as we begin, I'd like to offer a word of prayer and share a story from Scripture. Let's be in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for these teams of wonderful church leaders, members of staff parish relations committees who are connectors in the life of our congregations, connecting pastors, connecting the congregation, working with maybe some staff, working with me as superintendent and the bishop, all for the glory of Jesus Christ. For healthy churches that are transforming their neighborhoods and communities. Lord, bless us in this holy task and continue to strengthen and give wisdom and patience and discernment to these staff parish relations committee members. Bless us this day and every day in Christ's holy name. Amen. So I have up here the from Exodus 18, the story of Moses and Jethro. And to kind of catch you up, we're in the middle of the Exodus story, and Moses is doing the Moses job. He's standing in judgment. I mean, you are sitting technically, and people come up and he's like managing, having hundreds of people, all these 12 tribes, and they have issues and debates and problems, and they all come to him. Everybody comes to Moses. And Moses starts in the morning, goes all the way to the evening in judgment, basically being conflict resolution guy. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, he brings over some brides and kind of hangs out and kind of watches dynamic. And he says, "Golly, Moses, you got a huge job, and you're just doing an amazing. Look at all that's happened, and God's been blessing you." But and then Jethro offers some constructive criticism. He says, "But what you're doing right now, watching you, from morning to night, that's not good." And what Jethro actually says when his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he says, "What's this you're doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as a judge while these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me." Kind of goes on from there. Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you're doing is not good. You and these people who come out to only wear yourselves out. The work's too heavy for you. You can't handle it alone. Listen to me now, and I'll give some advice. You must be the people's representative for God and bring their disputes to him, but teach them his decrees and instructions and show them the way to live and how they're to behave. But select capable men from all the people, those who fear God, who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens, and have them serve as judges for the people at all times." In other words, delegate, spread it around, share the ministry that you're being called to. I love that idea of sharing ministry. And if you think about the role of pastor, there is a job description of pastor in the discipline, yes. And there are 26 subsections if you look up the job description of pastor. It's an impossible job description, by the way. It's a long list. But the idea behind that is it's not the pastor doing it by herself. It's a teamwork. You do it by teamwork. And it's something ministry is done in community. Same as what Moses needed to do. But the actual job description, the best one is from Ephesians. And that describes the job of a pastor is to equip the saints for ministry. Equip the saints for ministry. Pretty much what Jethro just told his son-in-law, Moses. Hey, why don't you equip others for the ministry and share that ministry? As Staff Parish Relations Committee, part of your job is to be Jethro, to be an encourager. Man, that's great. But here's some constructive criticism, and always encouraging, but also helping the pastor be as effective as she or he can be and as fruitful she can be as she leads in the congregation. And so that's my encouragement for you, to be an encouragers for your pastor, and provide constructive criticism, wisdom, listening ear, and support. And so if you think of your role as this Jethro role and work backwards from there, the job of the staff parish is not to get onto, or not to be the complaint committee, or not to take secret information from people and then fire it off all the time on the pastor. But it's also not to ignore troublesome spots and say, oh, well, we always support our pastor. Well, sure, I hope you do. But part of support means being constructive and telling the truth in love. So that's my encouragement for you as we begin, and to think of your role in this sort of biblical context. And as we get started here, I want to, if we look in the discipline, and it actually defines what Staff Parish Relations Committee, it's defined on paragraph, I'm sorry, there, bumped it with my Bible, 258.2. It's the administrative unit, local church, where the staff and pastor and the congregational interests are integrated to focus on the mission of the church. So you're not just doing it to make everyone happy. I know that's sometimes what we think, oh, we need to make everyone happy. No, it's how can we be fruitful in fulfilling the mission of the church? And your staff parish and your pastor, that's a job you do together. And if you unpack that, then let's see, where is the staff parish in the grand scheme of things? So if you look here on this chart, imagine that crossing plane, that's the annual conference. Of course, the annual conference is a we, not a they. We're all the annual conference. Every church is part of the Arkansas annual conference. And we also have a meeting and session of the annual conference and bishop and all that. Your charge conference is that link that links all the annual conference bodies together, all the churches. And then your church council is your executive committee that meets usually, monthly or quarterly, or whenever your church council meets. It might be called administrative board, might have different names. And then you have trustees, finance, different ministry teams that all report to the church council, but also the staff parish. It's in many ways the personnel committee of the church, and it is amenable to the church council, which is amenable to the church conference. So that's where it fits in the scheme of things. Staff parish folks need to be professing members of the local church. They need to be paying attention to their own discipleship. They are elected by the charge conference. It also includes not only the 5 to 9 who are elected, but also the lay member to annual conference and the lay leader. And they're both given voice and vote. So if it's 9 people, it's really often 11, if that's the max. Now, who cannot be on staff parish is staff members, family members of the pastor or staff, or more than one immediate family member from the same household. In other words, you can't have like a husband and wife both serving on staff parish. That's too many votes from one family unit. The whole thing with staff, this has popped up again and again and again. I'll just tell you, because oftentimes we don't think of some of our staff as staff. We think, oh, well, I'm just going to make up a name. Jane Doe, she's our children's minister. She's, quarter time. She's been a member of our church. Her family's been a member of our church. Why couldn't, her husband serve on staff parish? Because she's just a church member, right? Well, but she's getting a paycheck and she's overseen by the pastor, and that's just way too many complications. And so I myself had to work with some stuff when I was at a church that had a daycare, and one of the daycare staff, the husband wanted to be on staff parish. I'm like, well, we can't do that. And they were a little annoyed with me. They thought, well, I mean, the daycares, it's like so independent. I said, yeah, but if there's a problem, then there'll be a problem. And sure enough, there was a problem that year. And that guy came back to me and says, I'm really glad you didn't put me on staff parish, because that would have been a mess. I'm like, yeah, it sure would have been. So that's important to stick to that rule. On organizations and basic responsibilities, I said 5 to 9. We really encourage a young adult. One also could be a youth if you want them to. But everyone needs to be a professing member of the church. That means baptized and confirmed member of the church. That 5 to 9 folks are on a 3-year classes with rotation. You can do 2 rotations, so you can do a 3-year and a 3-year for a combination of 6. The lay leader and lay member annual conference are not on that rotation. They have their own. You can set up a different kind of rotation or whatever for them, but the others that are just elected are on that rotation of 3 years. And if you're on a charge with multiple churches, you can meet together or separate as you wish. I do suggest that you meet every once in a while together. I've seen situations where one church experience of a pastor and they're saying, hey, pastor, you need to do X, Y, Z. And that conflicts with the next church staff parish going, hey, pastor, you need to do A, B, C. And it's like, well, what you're telling me to do and they're telling me to do is like opposite. Could y'all, like, can we get together and talk about this first? And let's try to get on the same page and listen to each other. So I encourage y'all to get together regularly as a cooperative, the 2 staff parishes. You need to meet. It is required you meet quarterly. We recommend highly in the Arkansas Conference that Staff Parish Relations Committee meets monthly, especially in that first year. And let me tell you, I learned a lot about how to be a district superintendent from my mentor, Rodney Steele. Some of you may know Rodney from around about the conference. And one thing he told me when I was coming on the cabinet, he said, Blake, every time a problem has popped up, when I go to the church and I say, hey, so why didn't this come up in your monthly meetings? Every time there's a problem, they kind of look sheepishly, says, well, there wasn't a problem, so we didn't really think we needed to meet. And then there became a problem, and it's like, well, there you go. Stuff that could have been dealt with easily if you're meeting monthly then becomes, boom, a big old problem. And so that's my encouragement for you, is to meet monthly. Again, especially in that first year, but you might as well make it a practice, just part of your life. And even if it's really just relationship building and support, still do that monthly meeting. You can also meet at the request of the bishop or the DS or any person accountable to the committee or chairperson. You can choose whether or not to talk to some people, but the chair can set it, the pastor can set it, I can set it. I can actually ask a meeting to happen, and I can, as superintendent, actually preside at a meeting. So just kind of wanted you to know that those are all part of those expectations. Now, some also have questions about how you deal with the fact, because there's rules in the discipline about meetings and secret meetings. Pastor parish cannot have a secret meeting without the pastor. Now, they can say, hey, pastor would like to meet, and the pastor can say, well, I tell you what, why don't you all meet by yourself voluntarily? They can say that, but you cannot meet without the pastor present unless they voluntarily allow you to. Now, there is an exception, and that is the staff parish can meet with me as superintendent. And I am required to follow up with the pastor if it's stuff about them, very quickly after that meeting and let them know what happened. But that's the only way that the pastor parish committee, the staff parish committee, can meet without the pastor present, is if I'm in the room as superintendent. Or the bishop is in the room. You always meet in closed session. That means only members of the committee can be there. You can't have it's not an open meeting. Like, we have an open meeting law in the United Methodist Church. I think it's paragraph 722, but don't quote me on that one. But the staff parish committee is an exemption to that, because everything you do is confidential. You can agree as a committee and pastor to release certain information. And I suggest that you close every meeting with, do we have a communications item we need to share with the others? And it might be process stuff or whatever, but everyone needs to be kind of in agreement. Especially pastor and committee need to be in agreement with what's being said there, because you don't need to be releasing confidential information. Let me see. On the monthly meeting thing, I'm going to put this in the chat. I have a chart of suggested topics. There we go. If you see this is suggested topics for monthly meetings. And the one you on see on the screen is a few years old, but I've got them, and it was just redone for the 23-24 year last July. So, and we do it every cycle. So these are suggested topics for monthly meetings. So in addition to whatever else you're focused on, you can talk about this stuff. And so it's a recommendation. I do see a question about, and on evaluation, about reviews of pastors when they're filling it out. Here's the rules on pastor president reviews. You can talk to the pastor. My suggestion is talk to the pastor ahead of time, chairs, and say, hey, do you want to be in the room during the review, or do you want to step out for a few minutes and come back in? How do you want to do that? And you can kind of make an agreement and a plan with the pastor beforehand. And if the pastor wants to voluntarily step out, that's up to that pastor. However, you as a committee cannot require a pastor to step out during the review. You may say, I need you to be quiet and let us do this work, and we'll get to you in a second, but you can't make them leave. My practice personally had been like, hey, I want y'all to have some alone time, so I step out. Now, the one way that did burn me a few times as a pastor is the rule is if a pastor is going to voluntarily step out, when the pastor comes back in, every member of the group needs to be there, and you all need to share what you talked about with that pastor and go through it all. What you don't need to do is have the pastor cooling their heels in their office, and then the chair walk in and go, hey, by the way, we're done with our meeting, bye. And well, what was that? That's not cool. So if you're going to have, if the pastor is going to voluntarily step out, you need to honor that by do your work and invite your pastor back in the room and go through the whole conversation and walk through it and walk like a review, go through that stuff. And you need to honor that relationship. To do otherwise would be not appropriate. I hope that kind of covers some of that territory. And we can get into that more later. I know it gets real sticky, but it's one of those burdens of leadership is sometimes you have to do work that feels a little messy. I'm going to stop here and do some Q&A. Do you have any questions that's popped up so far? And you can unmute or you can put it in the chat.
What was the title of that staff and parish relations monthly guide? I'm not locating it on the link that you have.
Yeah. Here we go. It is I'm going to paste the whole text in there of it. It is the annual timeline here. It's that document right there. Annual timeline it shares expectations, an appointment assessment cycle, and suggests topics of discussion for a full year. So it's the third or fourth item. It's fourth item on the list.
So I have another question with relation to information that's leaving. Communications to the administrative council. Will there be is there a kind of a basic template or a topic or something that needs to be communicated back to that administrative council in like a templated format? Or
you mean like reporting to your church council?
Correct. Yes. Thank you. Sorry.
That's a great question. So my suggestion around that is to talk more about process than content. And let me give you an example. You can, the staff parish has a meeting. Maybe you talk about, well, we've had to do some disciplinary stuff around the youth pastor or something like that. You can go then to the meeting and say, we had our meeting, just remind everyone it's confidential. And we did have conversations around youth ministry, and we followed our disciplinary process, or we followed a process of conversation. You don't have to get into it real deep, but I mean, that can be there. Now, there are times you have to, may have to call some sort of executive session, church council, and really get into stuff if it gets really messy. But generally speaking, I would suggest, again, focusing on the process. I mean, I've had some of those situations where I had to go pretty much in front of the full church and say, hey, we had to let someone go. I'm not going to get in the details. I will say it had nothing to do with inappropriate boundaries at all. It had to do with job performance. And that was, usually we kind of talk about that ahead of time with an employee. And we went through an appropriate process. And we've been going through an appropriate process for several months before we let the individual go. I want you to know that I appreciate our staff parish. They followed the rules and followed a clear, appropriate process. And that way you're talking about those steps rather than digging into the content of stuff. Uh, that's usually the safest way to go on that. I think, for example, you do the annual review, you can go up to the church council. Hey, we turned in our annual review for our pastor, and we have asked for our pastor return and recommended that to the bishop and superintendent. You could go and you may want to have a conversation with you and the pastor may talk and say, hey, we talked to our pastor, and we are recommending that there's a change. I would want to clear that with the pastor first. You may just say, we sent our you might, if you can't get the pastor to agree to that because it's kind of messy, you and the pastor may say, hey, let's just use the language of, we turned it in and we're kind of awaiting next steps with the bishop and cabinet. And that might be the best way to go. Again, if you notice the kind of rules I have going in my head here, let's have some sort of agreement between the pastor and church on what's being said. And let's talk about process. Those are kind of my two guiding principles for communicating stuff. Daniel, those are great questions. Thank you. I'm looking at a couple of other questions on the thing. One is about cooperative parishes meeting regularly, monthly. I think that the staff parishes. If you have 2 or 3 churches, and we have pastor. I've got a pastor that's part-time with 4. You may want to do your staff parish together all the time, right? You have 4 staff parish. You don't want to have 4 meetings. That uses up all your time. I think you and those committees need to be having conversations about what's the best thing for our ministry, for how we're going to do appropriate listening and feedback and relationship. And in some situations, the best thing for the ministry is let's do it together. For others, it's let's do it apart, but let's do it on this cycle. And every quarter or 3 times a year or something like that, we need to get together, and including particularly the review time. We might want to have a conversation together, and when we set the salary, because our salaries kind of interact with each other. You may have that kind of set up. I think sitting down with those chairs and laying it out, what's our plan for the year, and getting that all in advance with the pastor and chair working together to figure out the model you want to use. And it may be 2 chairs or 3 chairs if you have 3 churches. But again, they need to meet a minimum of quarterly. The question is, how else do you want to meet to make the best work for your church? I see another question is, how much does staff parish rely on their HR department? For large churches may have some HR department. And I would say this, your staff parish can depend on HR departments really well. For example, if you have a large staff with everyone below like the director level, or you might just have your staff parish work at the pastor level, the appointed pastors, and maybe the executive directors, and then let the executive directors work with HR and other staff and have some guiding principles that says, for instance, you could have a framework in a large church. Hey, if there's a behavioral disciplinary process or termination for anyone below the coordinator and level or below the director level, it needs to involve us. If it's above it needs to involve. If it's below, it needs to be handled by that director, and they're given authority to handle it. So you can kind of set some guiding principles for certain stages of staff on the hierarchy, and then just have those rules clear and written down so that there's not a problem later. Because if, for example, if one of the nursery workers is a family member of someone in the church, and well, they just did a normal termination like you do, and you can't just clobber that director for not talking to staff parish about a nursery termination if you've already given them authority to handle it. So in other words, set that stuff ahead of time with certain levels of staff in those larger churches. Oh man, there's a lot of questions coming on the thing here. Annual staff parish evaluations of pastors, say the associate pastor is criticism of senior pastor. Okay, let me come back to that one. Should setting goals for pastor be part of staff parish? Yes, 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 definitely. I think the pastor needs to be listening, of course, with working with church council, but then coming up with those goals, showing those goals with staff parish, working with staff parish to help listen and clarify. Because staff parish, one of their best jobs is being able to be that feedback group. I'm going to dive more into that in a second, talking about mission and ministry. So I'll get more on that. And is there a procedure for an exit interview? I'm not going to talk about that so much tonight, but I think there ought to be that, if they're willing to do it, because you might learn some stuff you need to know. And staff parish would be the body that would be probably the best in place to do that. And maybe with the pastor. Staff parish, you and the pastor, some churches allow the pastor to do disciplinary process and terminations. Some of them say, hey, we need to do it together. And some of them say, hey, pastor, we'll take care of disciplinary stuff and terminations. You need to let us know there's a problem. I've seen all three in churches. They can all three be appropriate, but you need to define what your system is for what positions ahead of time. You don't need to get onto your pastor for going above and beyond her authority or under the authority, whatever, unless you talked about it. In other words, define what the system is and stick to it. And if you need to change the system, that's great, but write it down. Here's our system. Here's the rules for discipline stuff and all that. Let me come back to the question about dealing with being triangulated with an associate pastor and all that. Let me come back to that one. I think we need to talk about that in the appointment making and some of those other critical conversation stuff. So I'll come back to that one. Let's go about duties and responsibilities of staff parish. I've got that in paragraph 258.2 in the discipline, and you'll see a list there. Again, all these slides are going to be online. Actually, I'm going to give you the link. All my slides are online, and you can take these and use them in your own staff parish meeting or whatever you want to do with them, just so you don't have to worry about taking notes. These are some of the responsibilities listed. If you notice, kind of look through there. Notice this. It's staff parish relations. Just about everything on that list is about the relationship. It's not about just keeping the rules. It's not about being pushy. It's not about being whiny. It's not about holding anyone's feet to the fire, really. I mean, all that stuff may be part, I guess, but it's really about relationship. And relationships are often complicated and messy, right? But the relationship is what really matters here. It's investing in that relationship. And I hope the pastor and the committee are both all investing in that relationship. And it'll have ups and downs for sure. And there'll be times when you are having constructive criticism of the pastor, and there may be times the pastor may be having some pretty constructive criticism for the committee, and that's okay too, because again, it's a relationship, and that means you need to spend time together. One of the items, and someone asked about goals, is mission and ministry duties. And if you notice here, there's about encouraging, supporting the pastor, talking about the pastor about relationships with the congregation, priorities, skills, and goals. There, that goals is, pastor, what are your goals? But also, the pastor may come to the committee and says, hey, I got a weird letter or an email. I had a weird conversation with Joe Bob, and I'm not sure how to receive what Joe Bob told me. Could you help me unpack what's going on here? Why did Joe Bob say this to me? Is there a history of this? Is there a problem? Do I need to know something here? Do I need to work on something? You notice that's part of why you need to be really confidential. They need to be okay. You need to be able to hear that pastor talk about Joe Bob and why something's going maybe awry and help fix it before it becomes a big problem. And in fact, it may be that out of that conversation that you assign one of the people and say, hey, I know that Bill here is a good friend to Joe Bob. And Bill said, yeah, I sure am. And Bill maybe can help smooth this over. And so part of the assignment may actually be assigning someone else to help fix it. And Bill may say, okay, Pastor, you and me, we'll go have coffee with Joe Bob and see if we can figure this out together, the three of us. See how much better that would be. And when you try to help a situation, trying to bring fullness and wholeness back into some conflict, that's the kind of assignments that the staff parish may have. And another piece is, you kind of see here, review candidates for ministry. I would hope we have a lot more ministry folks being called in to be local pastors and ordained folks and CLMs and all that. That's another expectation for staff parish. There's some personnel issues, and you do things like you recommend you approve job descriptions, you recommend salaries for clergy. You probably also, if you're a larger church, are recommending salaries for like executive directors. You may assign the rest of the salaries of the church to other people on the team, but you have some responsibilities there. Consult with the pastor around compensation and travel and all that. If it's vacation and it's time for the pastor to get on the road and get out of town, get out of Dodge, the staff parish is responsible to help fill the pulpit. And you may work with a lay speaker, or you may decide to help do it yourself as a team. That's part of making that possible. I'll just tell you, I was a solo pastor in a small church. Gosh golly, it weighs on a pastor being on call 24/7 when you don't have an associate, you don't have a big staff, you're the solo pastor. When you're on call 24/7, you really need to know that when you can take a vacation, you can pull away. It wears folks down. They may never get a call, but they could always get a call, and it may be at 2 o'clock in the morning. And knowing that's part of your lifestyle for sometimes decades can be a little tough. So, Pastor Parish, how can you help that process, and how can you give appropriate time away? And of course, you notice this item with the pastor: hire, contract, evaluate, promote, retire, dismiss non-appointed staff. Again, figure out for either each staff member or each tier of staff member, what are the expectations and rules for supervision? Who's the supervisor really? What kind of limits does the pastor have in that relationship? You don't want to wait till something happens and then be trying to figure that out. And you sure don't want to have the pastor think they have certain authority and the staff parish doesn't. And then the staff parish, the pastor may terminate somebody, and then staff parish is like, you did what? And it causes a problem. That's not helpful. So that's, again, do that ahead of time. Committee development, we have the safe gatherings policy, you have the sexual misconduct process, all that. All these are policies that we have. Those are just more responsibilities. And again, when I think about these relational skills, I wrote this list down because staff parishes often get triangulated. You've had it happen, I know. Someone comes up to you and says, hey, I know you're on that personnel committee. I need to tell you something, but I don't want you to use my name. And let me just say this, that's not appropriate. Now, I don't blame the person for not knowing, because that's not their job to know it's not appropriate. But when you're a staff parish member, you need to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Before you tell me, I need you to know that I have a covenant with the other staff parish members and the pastor that if you tell me something, I don't take it anonymously to the committee or to the pastor. So if you want to tell me, that's fine, but you need to know that. And you as a staff parish person could say, my responsibility is, if you tell me something, that I'm going to say, have you talked to the pastor yet? Do you need me to go with you? Not to be on your side and to advocate for you, but just to be there as a safe presence. You may remember this, it's Matthew 18. Or maybe that do we need to talk to the chair, and maybe you have a conversation with the committee here and the pastor in a room? Would that be the best? What's the best way for you to feel like you're heard? But it's not going to be you give me anonymous information. And when you sit in that meeting as staff parish, you can't go to that pastor and say, well, some people are saying. No, 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 no. If I was a pastor and someone told me that on staff parish, I'd say, whoa, 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 you are obligated by being elected and saying yes, you're obligated to tell me who that information's from. And the reason is the source of information can make a big difference in how you deal with the information. And so you just kind of think about that. Also, don't be trolling around for complaints. In other words, I had one church that really wanted to do a complaint box in the back of the sanctuary. And I'm like, why? No, that's just asking for trouble. If you there's feedback and there's just trying to find problems, and that's really different stuff. And then when you do give feedback, give it in the form of good evaluation. You're meeting monthly. Say, hey, Susan said this, Jane said this. It looks like we have a trend here. What's going on, Pastor? We need to unpack some of the stuff. And then you unpack it together, trying to work out how do we solve this together. Notice what I didn't say. You don't just take all that and dump it on the pastor and say, okay, pastor, now fix it. I said, let's work on this stuff together. That's the Christian way, I think. I think it feels more like Jethro's advice. Hey, let's team up. Let's figure this out. And now, of course, there are some exceptions on this, and I'll be talking about this later, and that is if it's about misconduct around sexual misconduct or misconduct around money, that's a completely different situation. If it's anything with a chargeable offense, you need to call your district superintendent, me, immediately. Like you hear about it and you say, don't move, let me text the superintendent. And you don't even leave the room before you report it to. Just send me a text. I'm going to give you my phone number. It is, I'll put it in the chat right now. That's my cell phone, staff parish chairs. You are staff parish chairs. You have access to my cell phone. Please don't spread it around and put it on bulletins. But if you need to get a hold of me, you get a hold of me. Give me a text, say, hey, I've got something I need to report to you. And then we'll unpack that real quick if it's anything chargeable. And we'll get moving on that immediately. Also, I'll just tell you, I coach a lot of staff parish chairs. I do it every day. So if you have something going on, you need to you can call the church the district office, set a meeting with me, and I'll help you unpack like chairs, how to process something in your committee. I'm not trying to work outside the pastor. I'm just saying sometimes chairs need a little guidance on how to proceed, on what steps to take. I won't get into the content. I'll just help you on the steps. And so I'm happy to do that, kind of like I just did with some of this other material. So I just want you to know I'm here to help resource y'all as committees. On confidentiality stuff, I'm just going to leave the slide up here. I've said most of this stuff already, but I put it on another slide. I did this. I did several versions of this kind of, how you do communications, because if your primary job description is relationships, well, you need to be thinking about how you do relationships well as a governance committee. So this is all kind of repeated again, but that's all. These are my suggestions for having good integrity as your staff parish committee. Okay, and then I've got Matthew 18, because most of job of staff parish actually isn't discipline stuff. It's Matthew 18 stuff. It's stuff about how we talk about and communicate with each other. And not get triangulated in, not cause a bigger problem, not add extra conflict, but how you have clean communication and work through stuff. So this is a system for that. And again, all these slides are on that webpage that I sent you. Okay, I'm gonna stop, pause, Q&A for this section. We talked about a lot of stuff here about your responsibilities and a lot of stuff about how you communicate well. What questions you have, you can put it in the chat. I'm gonna touch on that issue with the associate pastor being triangulated in just a second. But is there any other questions? Okay, so let me back up. On the staff parish, I'm going to read this question. If the associate, it says assistant, but I'm going to use the word associate pastor. That's our language. Has christened the senior pastor to the staff parish, give the associate pastor annual eval the senior pastor? And the answer, I think, is no. What I do think, you don't want to hand over their document without them knowing. Let's look at that through the lens of this Matthew 18. Where did I put that? You as staff parish, if you're interviewing with the associate and they're having some real conflicts in your pastor, I think you can say, hey, let's have our staff parish chair or other designee meet with the associate pastor and the senior pastor to try to clear the air here. Obviously, there's some issue between the associate not feeling like they can talk to the senior or not feeling heard. So let's try to handle that. Another option is to bring me in. You're dealing with two appointed personnel. I've done it before. I've tried to deconflict a senior and associate pastor. I'm happy to do it again. If y'all don't feel like you can handle it at the local church level, you can. I'll try to handle it at my level. But I'd say try to do it. The issue with bringing me in is this: if y'all can't handle it, that's great. Let's bring me in. If you bring me into the conversation as superintendent, it usually adds more drama to the situation and it heightens everyone's anxiety. I know that about whenever a district superintendent walks in the room, it adds anxiety to the space. I get that. And so I try to use my presence sparingly to not create more problems. So if you can handle it by helping them talk is the best way. What I would not do is just hand over someone's conversation directly to them. Now, that being said, the senior pastor needs to probably, be in the room for part of that eval, or maybe all of it, because the senior pastor is the direct supervisor of that associate. So if it's the actual evaluation that you submit to me, I kind of expecting the senior pastor's in the room, and the senior pastor has a lot of say on whether or not that associate remains appointed there or not. So I'm trying to divide between your formal consultation and formal evaluation, and then just the run-of-the-mill day-to-day stuff. I think deconflicting is good, but you need to be asking your senior pastor, how's that associate doing? I've had associate pastors, and I've had to give some pretty honest appraisals of some stuff in the past. So I think y'all need to be listening to that senior pastor as well when it comes to that kind of work. I don't know if I answered that question or just made it muddier. Let me know. Okay, that being said, any other questions? Not seeing any. I'm not hearing any. Okay. Appointment making. My hope for appointments is that y'all have good conversations. They're really honest. My job and my biggest hope out of all of that process is I want your churches to be fruitful and faithful. And I want the ministry to be growing and thriving. So let's aim our conversations toward thriving ministry. That does not always mean happy church members. There may be a percentage of church members who are unhappy because, I've seen them unhappy because the church was growing. They didn't want all those darn young people wanted that kind of music in the room. I was like, well, I'm kind of wanted to say too bad on that one. If a lot of young people are showing up, I think we need to be applauding, not getting on to the preacher. But I think if everyone knows your goal is not making everyone happy, but growing the church of being fruitful and faithful, then the conversation is, well, the folks aren't unhappy for one reason or another. How can we help get them on board? Or how can we make sure their needs are being met? That might not mean what they want exactly, but let's listen to them and find out what's going on. You see the difference? But I, I could try to use some more examples, but I think I'm just beating that dead horse. Um, but appointment making is not about happiness, it's about missional fruitfulness. Now we have this annual appointment cycle, and if you look here, you start with appointment year, and every year we're appointed again to the church or appointed to a new ministry field or retire or whatever. But we run this cycle on an annual basis, and you're either reappointed to that church or you're appointed elsewhere. And we have the monthly meetings. We try to follow up with DS. There's check-ins with the superintendent. We do consultation annually, and then we cycle back to appointment. And we just run this cycle again and again and again. We're about to start appointment year. In 2 weeks, the bishop and appointive cabinet are about to start meeting. We're going to meet over at Mount Eagle, and we'll be talking about appointments and going through the map. If you know here, if you see here, what the staff parish is doing is recommending. The appointments are the responsibility of the bishop and the appointive cabinet. But so your job as staff parish is to recommend. We want the pastor to return. We don't want them to return, or whatever. We have some issues; they're not being reconciled. Whatever the thing is, tell us so we know. All right, I'm gonna stop here. Any Q&A stuff? Any Q&A? Okay, not hearing any. Not.
Hey,
Oh yes.
like
Hey,
I'm tardy. This is Jeannie Hill from Central.
hey there.
This is just an accounting question. What percentage in our region are moved around every year, get new appointments and so forth?
Okay. We usually have around 40. Well, in the past, we used to have around 45 full-time appointments change every year. Now, in the past couple of years, we had 15 in January and about 30 because appointments are just year-round nowadays. I'm guessing we'll probably have, in the post-affiliation world, we'll probably have around 35 to 40 every year for the next few years. And that is statewide, of course. So, 7-8% maybe.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Evaluations reporting. I've kind of talked about doing that, a regular evaluation. Hey, friends, if you wait until the annual evaluation to tell something, if it's January now, if you were like really annoyed by something I did, and man, that Blake, he is so annoying when he does XYZ, but you didn't tell me till December when you did an annual evaluation, that's not helpful. That's not good for me. It's not good for you. It's not good for the church. So that's part of the reason we talk about, talking monthly. When you get to your annual eval and your consultation, no one should be surprised. There should be no surprises. Everyone should go, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. We've talked about that for months. That's my hope. No surprises when you start filling out forms, because you've already been dealing with this material. On, again, reporting significant behaviors, chargeable stuff, contact me immediately. And get stuff in writing as quickly as possible. That's what I need if there's something like that. And I need y'all to know, we have zero tolerance for any of this stuff. Zero. And if there's something like this, you need to it's on y'all as staff parish to contact me. If you have something going on in your local church around laity or lay staff, that usually doesn't come to my level if it's not appointed. Usually you handle that internally. But if something happens around, like issues around like sexual misconduct or misuse of money, I need to be contacted anyway, because the media could be involved, and I may need to walk you through some stuff. I've seen some churches, they waited a few weeks because they were trying to deal with something before they called me, and they took 3 or 4 wrong steps before they did something, and it created a bigger problem later. So let me be with you on your first steps and coach you along the process. I've probably dealt with these more than y'all have. I hope I have, because I mean, just being a superintendent. But also know that, I mean, we've seen it here in Arkansas. We have a church in Little Rock from another denomination that's been in the news a lot lately, because I mean, they even had different staff in charge because people left and pastor retired, a new pastor, but they did not handle stuff well, and they did not take care of victims. And it is really bad for those victims. A lot of more people got harmed, and a lot of people hearts are breaking right now because they didn't handle stuff well. And so I'm happy to help you walk through that. All the superintendents are. I'm gonna stop again for Q&A, and then we're gonna talk about some clergy compensation stuff. Did that raise up any questions for you?
Like it did.
Okay, who am I talking with?
Steve Sherman.
Hey there.
Is my name. Good day, sir. We have a deacon who, as I have learned, is in a kind of a 3-year, gosh, what do you call it? Program where he's evaluated. I think
residency?
He has.
Yeah, the provisional residency program. Yes, I used to run that.
Residency in 3 years or more,
Uh-huh.
and apparently they meet like with other deacons and other pastors that are in that kind of. There's a lot of, if I'm understanding the process, I mean, they're getting feedback, they're getting information, evaluations, instruction. Right. Could I engage whoever is doing that kind of residency to learn more about helping, mentoring on this end?
I think that'd be great. Yeah. I think
they're just different, aren't they? The deacons are a little bit different.
Well, it's not just deacons. I used to run the residency program. I did it for over a decade, actually, before I was a superintendent. The folks in charge of that, there's elders and deacons in it. And deacons, yes, they are different than elders, and their calling is different. The ordination is different. They're called in and ordained to different things. For elders, word, sacrament, order, and service. For deacons, it's word, service, justice, and compassion. And I think that you talking with them and connecting up, getting that information from your deacon would be great. And you can find out a little more about that. I think that'd be excellent. That program, while you're focused on your local church and ministry, those residency programs, and think of it the same as a medical residency, right? You go to medical school, doctor goes to medical school, internship, there's a residency they do before they're board certified. It's similar to clergy. They do this residency before they're ordained, and they have lifetime tenure and all that. And so that program's focus is on the formation of that pastor, that deacon or elder, that's going to be ordained, and having them formed the way God needs them to for a lifetime of ministry service. So I think, feel free to connect with that group that's in charge of that for the Board of Ordinary Ministry. I will say there's a little bit of a firewall. I send some evals in too, but there's the credentialing body in the annual conference, which is the Board of Ordinary Ministry, and there's me and the bishop. We're part of the appointment process and supervision. So we're supervising their credentialing. And so we interact sometimes, but we have different roles in the life of the annual conference. So that's just kind of a little bit of background there. More than you want to know, probably. Okay. Yeah, I think that'd be great to help. How do you help form when you have a residency? Someone in residency. I'll tell you, as someone who used to run that program, those holy habits, when you receive someone early in their ministry, whether it be a resident or brand new local pastor, that is a great opportunity to, as a leadership body, to pour yourself into that pastor early in their ministry career, because they will set up some holy habits for the rest of their ministry, and you can have a huge impact on their trajectory. So being a supportive presence during that mentorship it'd be great. I love that. So thank you. I'm going to talk about some clergy guidelines here for comp. Compensation is for the position, not the person. I know that sounds a little trite, and you go, well, yeah, but it's a person. I get it. But you need to think about it this way. And so much so that when we do compensation nowadays, we don't even do it for right now. We do it as of July 1. So your pastor may not even be your pastor when that compensation activates, because that's the next appointment year. And the reason is you can't decrease the comp mid-year. You can only do it on July 1 or during the conference year. And so, because that's sort of like a year-long contract sort of thing. And it can only be changed by the charge conference. You can't just do it mid-year. And the role of the staff parish, you need to be an advocate for that pastor. You need to assess the situation and figure out, what's the best what's the best rate that matches what you're asking for. Now, I get asked this a lot about what's the right amount and all that. And it's really hard for me to say. That is a staff parish responsibility. I can tell you a little bit about how it compares to similar churches. We can work with our office on that. We usually give some kind of close, like what similar worship attendance, that you need to make some adjustments because, for example, if we have a pastor north of the tunnel in that metro area, just a place to live costs 2 or 3 times as much than what like parts of the river valley. Here I'm in Fort Smith. That's where our office is. Housing cost on this side and that side of the tunnel, completely different. And that needs to be recognized when you set salaries. Also think about incomes of similarly trained people in the community, depending on, is this one of our master's degree folks or, kind of, and think about what nonprofits are doing in your local area. Now, do remember that, or you may be people in the education field and stuff like that. You might do comparables there. Now, there's a couple of things to remember, and that is, and I'm going to talk about some tax and benefit stuff. Clergy taxes and benefits are really different than the secular world. And I'm going to talk about that in a second, but just know that we don't have benefit packages. We have a couple of churches in the district that have a benefits package. Most of us have to get our own insurance on the market, like on the .healthcare.gov or whatever. So that's not a separate fund out of your church. So you just need to do comparables. Remember those comparables because you don't want to compare to a nonprofit or a professor at university or something like that has a whole benefits package. Now, things you don't need to be asking is if they're male or female. That should not matter, right? Also, they have a spouse's income. That should not matter. That's an equity for our single pastors. That's a real private matter, depending on spousal income. There's a compensation package, includes salary, some sort of housing allowance. It may include some accountable reimbursement. Some churches do it, some don't. It's, whatever, it's a separate thing. There are no conference health benefits. We used to have them, we stopped. So, and just remember that if you have a full-time pastor and that's their only income, every year healthcare costs more, and usually that means every year pastors are getting paid less because I haven't seen salaries rise as much as healthcare. And so, most of our pastors take cuts every single year because healthcare costs more. Just, please recognize that. There is a pension program for full-time clergy through WestPath. We do not have one for part-time clergy. They get no part of that pension. They can do their own personal investment, but there is no church match. Now, also a note on clergy taxes. Their clergy are weird as far as the IRS is concerned. For income tax, it says they're employed by the local church, but they're self-employed for Social Security. So we pay SECA, not FICA. And usually what we do is we do quarterly estimates. In other words, we have withholding from the local church. What happens is, for instance, I have to do a calculation and I turn in a quarterly estimate to the IRS that is, my income tax. And I don't pay, the church doesn't pay half, if employee, usually there's half of the payroll taxes is paid by the employment body, right? The employer, and the employee pays half, right? FICA. Well, for clergy, it's not 7.5, it's all 15% is paid by the clergy. It's part of the self-employment tax. So again, if you're doing apples to apples with local, like nonprofit executive directors or something like that, you need to do that calculation before you run the apples to apples. So the church does not withhold or pay FICA, and the church does, however, do a W-2. And then you put the housing in that little other box there. And it's really weird and complicated. And, I'm not a tax professional, I'm not an attorney, but I can help you fill out the forms for the church, and I can try to explain it the best I can. But it's a bit of a mess on clergy taxes. It makes no actual sense. You just have to kind of go along with it and say, oh yeah, that's just the way it works. Okay. Also, there are a few other clergy policies. This is our journal this is the meeting of the annual conference, and that's our annual journal. This is this actually the 22 one. I'll have the 23 in book form. We have certain policies. We have vacation policy set by the annual conference. It's on a scale depending on how long you served for the annual conference, not the local church, but the annual conference, how many weeks you get, up to 4. And then churches can always do more, but they can't do less. It's minimum. It's a floor, not a ceiling. And then continuing to add 2 weeks annually. There's some parsonage standards, and there's a salary arrearage and minimum compensation. And there's also a moving expense stipend it's not great, but it's not nothing. So it's something for folks when we move them. And it's paid by the annual conference out of tithe money. One thing about vacation I've noticed lately, I've dealt with a few pastors that were like, well, I'm a few years away from retirement, and the church couldn't really give them a raise, and they kind of negotiated with their staff parish for an extra week of vacation and stuff like that. And they asked me if that was legal, and I said, yeah, that's fine. That's kind of worked out the local level. But everyone just, again, needs to be in agreement for stuff like that, because that's just, you don't want to do that to somebody. That needs to be a conversation with somebody. So that's some of the policies there. Okay, that's it. And I'm open for, man, I did about 1 hour. It was perfect. I'm going to stop my share on this. I'm going to see if there's any questions. Actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is let me shut down the recording. And then I'm going to, if I can find the recording, stop recording.